Hello, climbers, and welcome to Season 4 of Climbing Mount CMMC. We're going to be talking about system security plans. Let's get into it. The fun, exciting.
They're sexy. They're fun to talk about.
They're so fun.
They don't get all of the glitz and glory that they should, but I mean it is probably one of the biggest reasons people fail is because they don't understand system security plans and have a good one, and they go down in fire and flames.
Yeah.
So this is a really good one to pay attention to listen. You'll learn a lot through it.
We're gonna get more into, here's an example of things that look bad in a system security plan. Here's the things that could look better if you change this, about it. We're gonna get into very specifics of the different pieces and the different aspects of a system security plan. And what I mean by that is a lot of people talk about, NIST 800-171 controls and assessment objectives. And we talk about, you have to have those in a system security plan, but that is not all that goes into your system security plan. There are many different layers, many different things that are involved, and we're going to talk about each of those pieces and how detailed you should go. Maybe not too detailed. Maybe, it's like, is it the porridge method, I guess,
right.
of system security plans? So yes, let's get into it. Okay. So if you don't already know what a system security plan is, we're just going to go over this briefly, but it is your foundation. It is the document that should house all of your information and speak clearly to your company's security. It is going to be based upon NIST 800-171 security controls, which has 110 of them, and there are 320 assessment objectives. We're going to go through all of those, but there are also more components of a system security plan than just that. I did want to emphasize this. System security plans are not new, right? They've been around for a while. And actually, DFARS Clause 252.204-7012, it has been a requirement to have a system security plan when handling this type of information and when handling DoD contracts. If you have that DFARS clause in your contract, you actually have been attesting to having a system security plan, but not many people knew about that, huh?
And then also, if you're an MSP, you need to have a system security plan because there's going to be situations where if you don't have your level 2 audit, let's say you don't, you still need to have your SSP for all 320. You need to have a plan that's built because the auditor is going to want to ask you questions about how you're going to address those. Right. So they're like, okay, so your team, your people have access to this client's tenant. And they're like, yep. So you do training for your team? And you're like, well, yeah, I do. And you're like, do you have a policy that outlines that you got to do that? And you're like, what? Like, yeah, you can't just steal off your client's paper and just assume that everything you're providing to them is spoken through that. So if you're an MSP and you're providing that insight and support and you're providing technical controls to the client, you have to have an SSP, and chances are the auditor is going to want to see some components. They're going to want to see some of the policies and some of the procedures that you're doing for the client because it's just, especially if you don't have a level 2. Yeah. They're going to want to see a lot of those types of things because they just don't know what you have and have not done. Just because the client has to do it doesn't mean that you've done it. And so they want to see a lot of that. So yeah, this is where you start to realize as you try to move a client through their assessment, you not having a level 2, you start to go, okay, this is getting a little scary because you start to think about, they're going to start asking us these things, and I don't know if I have that, and I don't have this. So getting your level 2 forces you to do those things. And then as you go to move a client through it, you're like, oh, okay, I can see where I can leverage off of my own homework here for this part, and it saves your bacon some. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. But as we said before, a system security plan is your foundation, and there's going to be things that stem off of this. Bobby, I'm going to put you on the spot for this question. When you were building your system security plan, did it present holes for you in these other spiderweb locations, such as policies, procedures, your implementation process? Did it
Yeah.
conjure up other things when building the system security plan?
Well, I'll tell you the mistakes I made first. I went in and just started trying to write it. And then what I started realizing is as I started going through, well, we're going to do it this way. And then we would do it this way. And then I think we're going to do access control this way as we work with the client. And you're like, okay, so you write it this way. And then you're like, okay. And then we're going to do, well, but when we go to remote in to support them in 3.1.20, I think, or something is, external connections. So when I'm as a user, as an MSP, as an external connection coming in to support my client, like, how am I going to do that? Is that authorized? And then I've got to worry about FIPS when I'm coming in to do that. And then what you start realizing is you can't just sit down and just crank it out and write it as a managed service provider. And then as a managed service provider, what it starts doing is it starts pointing you towards the whiteboard. I need to get on a whiteboard and I need to start mapping out, like, architecturally how I'm going to do this in the documentation architecturally. So as you see the little spider webs pointing out from the center of the SSP, you need to think about what you're going to have in a procedure, what you're going to have in a policy, and then, how you're going to do your architecture, your drawings, and how you're going to do that. And if you're a managed service provider supporting the client, you then also have to have in your SSP about how you're going to talk to your client's SSP. So you have to really have two that you're designing. You're going to have to design your clients, and you have to design yours, and then you have to see about how they're going to talk to each other. And in the middle is the CRM, the customer responsibility matrix, which you see that little arrow on yours kind of kicking off to the left. And so what that does is that then you can start saying, okay, now at a high level with that whiteboard, you've drawn out how you're going to do it. And now you can start going through and writing it and hopefully not find yourself painted into corners as you're going through it. You probably will. And you'll have to go back to the whiteboard again and write some more stuff up, because if you're human like we were as we were going through it, we were like, okay, I hit a section here. I need to go talk to a C3PO or a CCA or somebody that's gone through audits that can give us some better insights about this. And then you start kind of going through that. And so that's why if you're an organization that's working with an MSP, it's really critical that you understand that they understand that they understand about how it's not just yours and it's not just theirs, it's yours working together, and they have thought about it and designed it. And they should be able to, if they've done this, show it to you right then. Right? Here's ours. Here's the clients. Here's the CRM. If they're like, we're still working on that, we don't even have that done, we're going to do this. If they're still in the whiteboard phase, do you really want to, bring them on as a client? Or as an MSP, do you want to be bringing on clients when all you're on doing is the whiteboard phase, right? You want to think about that. So getting past the whiteboard phase and having words on paper with real design and architecture is critical.
Absolutely. So what we mean by that is, where are you putting your policies and procedures? Where are you putting your system security plan? Do you have a good design with where you're putting the documentation so that you know where everything is? Because this is a lot of information. This is going to be a lot of detail. And if you have it all thrown into one place, jumbled up, it is going to be a crapshoot to try to change, if you have to adjust something or if you have to make a revision. So know when you're building this stuff and you're starting off that you're going to have to go back into these things and maybe switch some things up and move some things around. So build it with that care and that thought in mind, right? Bobby, is there something that you learned from that that you wanted to share? Maybe some pitfalls or some things that you learned from your process?
There's different approaches, which when we get to the scratch sniff examples later on, which we'll show actual SSPs and some pieces, we'll let you guys talk about it. Trust me, we're going to get into the weeds, but one of the things you want to think about is the level of detail you want to have in your SSP. It's got to be shown somewhere. So it's going to be shown, the evidence is going to be shown in either interview, test, or examine. Right? That's the assessment methodologies. If you go through the CCP and CCA courses, they talk about it. Interview, test, examine. So the auditors are going to go through those pieces, and you can either cover a lot of that in your SSP, and then when they read it, they don't necessarily feel the urge to immediately go to policy or procedure because you've covered it in enough detail, or you can punt it to the policies and procedures. Your SSP will be much smaller, right? So you might have a 80-page SSP or a 60-page SSP versus a 200-page SSP. Because if you think about it, there's 320 assessment objectives, and you've got to write something for each of those. So if you had to write a small little paragraph for each 320 assessment objectives, that's a lot of pages. And then, oh, by the way, you've got to throw your network diagram, your data flow diagrams, all those pieces in your SSP for them to see that. And when you add all of that, it makes it a pretty big document. So you just want to, like what you're saying, Kaylee, think about when you're writing it, the level of detail that you want to go in. And do you want to put the burden more on the policy and procedures, or do you want to try to have them more in the SSP? Think about that as you're writing it. Now,
when you're saying burden, you're meaning the burden of a potential change or adjustment of them, like
yeah. The tactic we took is we went into some more detail in the SSP with our goal that we feel like we could almost get a met by how we wrote it in the SSP. We would try to do it there with the reference to policy and then procedure from there. Our goal was to try to get a chunk of assessment objectives met by the auditor just reading the SSP. Now, I would not suggest you go here to intra in this section here, here, and here, and here, and this is where this is set specifically. We do have that in our SSP, and it hurts sometimes. I wouldn't recommend that, especially on your first few that you're writing. Try to be more high level. But if you start to find that you've kind of found that perfect avatar of how you're going to have your architecture design, and you're comfortable with writing that because that's how it's always going to be, then yeah, sure.
Remember when we used to print out MapQuest before we went places, and they would tell us, like, you're going to turn right here on this road and turn left here on that. And then but now we have our phones that kind of update for us our maps, so we don't have to think about that stuff. Well, be cautious about what you write down on the direction, because if you change it just a little bit, then you'll have to go in and change it.
Yeah, you don't want to send the auditor on a fetch test. You don't want to be like, we cover this in our access control policy, and it's like 15 pages. You're like, where in my 15 pages? Like, if it's a smaller document that is very highly focused on that topic, sure, you can refer to it. But if it's like there's 15 different topics in that policy and you're just throwing it into that general direction, that's just, you want to try to help get the auditor in and out.
Yep.
So the faster you try to do that. So there's a bit of an art through it, and we're learning, we're getting better. We've got a list of things that we want to change about how we do our templated processes with our SSP, but it's just like, it's kind of like artwork, man. You're never satisfied ever.
When do you stop?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So your SSP, in theory, should be written in enough detail that, for those that may or may not be familiar with the different phases of your assessment, your SSP should be, for the most part, written this is just my opinion, written in such enough detail that an auditor could look at that and go, you passed phase one. Like, if it is written in such little detail that they've got to go look for a whole bunch of different documents to find the answers to determine if you can get out of phase one, which is basically like what Kaylee's talking about. It's very much all of those items. You want to make sure you have the boundaries defined. You want to know who has access to CUI and is in the boundary of having, who's out of it, what devices are in, which ones are providing security protection around that data. All of that sort of needs to be painted out. That SSP needs to cover that in enough detail that they don't have to look at 20 different documents to be able to determine that you can leave out of phase one. To me, I think that proves that you have a mature system security plan.
I completely agree. And so let's first go into system boundaries and scoping, which, this one is very, very important. And I think all of them are important, but I think this one is really scary in my opinion, because let's say you scope this on what you think is right, and you do the whole network diagram with this scope in mind. You think about the data flow of this area, and then you go into the assessment and they find a hole in your scoping. You could have locked down that scope that you thought it was really well, but you're still about to start failing stuff because you got your scope wrong, and that just it's like a domino effect when you get this thing wrong. And so if you need to spend a lot of detail and time on this, like, This is so important. Bobby, you want to speak to it on your side as well, the network diagram and the classifications of it.
Yeah, this is one area where you probably want to have, if you don't really know scoping very well, it's an art. Some people have a gift for it. If you don't, then you probably need to bring outside assistance in doing that. So what does that mean? So that means you could find someone who's been through assessments and have a lot of experience in being assessed and audited, and they understand the boundaries and the technologies that'll help them be safe.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, is printing allowed physically? Where is it allowed in the boundary of the building?
Mm-hmm.
Are they able to, do they have their mobile phones? Can their mobile phones see CUI? Is it company-owned mobile phones only, or is it BYD? Do you allow people to bring their own computers?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do they have access to CUI, or are they out of scope? Like, all of those questions and more will need to be answered, and that all kind of defines that scope boundary. And the auditor wants to know, okay, of the 40 people do you have, how many can they open CUI? And you might go, well, all of them. Like, okay, you've defined your boundaries, everything. Or you might go half of them. But and then you might have multiple containers, like maybe you have a commercial container, maybe you have a GCC or GCC high container, maybe you only have one container and you've split it in. I mean, the possibilities are endless, but you've got to know how to do that and feel comfortable that you have a good enough understanding that when you're looking the auditor in the eye, you can help them understand it, and they're going to shake their head and say yes. Because if not, you get a false start and you don't get out of phase one, and you get punted with your client back to the starting line. And that may cost you money. It may not. It just depends on how the C3PO handles it.
Yeah, and if you don't know asset types for CMMC, it's going to be very hard to create that boundary and understand the different parts of it, right? So, like, if you don't understand what a CRMA is, a contractor risk managed asset, and what that is defined as, it would be very difficult for you to scope this out properly. There are different pieces to it. Specialized assets, you can't manage them as an MSP like you can other devices, right? So you have to scope them in a certain way to define that. Speaking of managed service providers, you have to know about external service providers that have access to your systems. That is included with your scoping, because all of a sudden you've opened this pathway for another provider or another company or another user to have access into your environment. So that is also why we put the asset types underneath there. And we're not going to go into detail because we don't have enough time to go into depth from each of these, but I really do recommend you guys doing your research on these different types of assets and what they are and how they're used.
You can spend an hour going through
just those.
You could spend a half a day just talking about actually scoping, because it is an artwork type thing.
Okay, so let's talk about data flow, right? So CUI, this is definitely very important. The big three letters that are a part of CMMC level 2. And what we have to be identifying and controlling in our environment. So this is a very big deal. You need to be identifying where the CUI lives and where it moves around your system, and define if there are, potentially any gaps with how you have it now. I'm going to assume, Bobby, I don't think we've ever really talked or gone inside of a company's system that had CUI that was managing it perfectly at the time of us going into. This is, they definitely, the DoD did push this on small contractors, and there wasn't a lot of follow-up, and the contractors did not do a lot of homework about this kind of stuff. Not all of them. And I definitely understand, but we need to lock it down now. And this is something that some people just have it in a random, SharePoint library that everybody has access to in their environment. And it's like, oh yeah, this is our CUI, folder of something, and it lives there. And it's like, okay, oh, but we also do Well, we also do take that and we move it into a system like to design something. So we're designing it in this in this environment over here. Okay. So is that where it ends? Oh, well, no, we also print it out and then they start thinking, they're like, no, it lives in our SharePoint. It does. It lives in our SharePoint. But then we start talking about it, we realize it lives in your
All the
SharePoint.
time.
It
Happens
lives in your
all the
SharePoint.
time.
And then it goes other places. It goes into a lot of different places after that.
It's so simple until you start asking questions, and then all of a sudden the client starts going, oh, this is way more complicated than I. Because they'll be like, I just only save it in one library. Okay. Well, who has access to that library? Me and well, I guess pretty much everybody. You're like, okay. And they're like, so everybody can have access to it? Yeah. So do they work from home? Yeah. And you're like, can they access it from company owned and not company owned stuff? And they're like, yeah. You're like, okay, so everybody in your company can access the CUI from anywhere on the planet. Well, I mean, if you put it that way, like, yeah, that's how I'm putting it. Like they literally can. So could they print it? Well, we tell them not to, but they could, right? And you're like, yeah. So they could print all the CUI anywhere they want. Yes. So you basically have no control over your data. Well, I mean, if you put it that way, I'm like, yeah, that's how I'm putting it. Like you have no
That's
control.
probably how an auditor would put it.
Right. So you've got to think about like that flow, like how does it come into the environment and how do you protect it? And you've got to provide justifications of how you got to do it. And opening your scope all the way up and letting anyone do whatever they want doesn't get you, out of jail free card, because you have to have control of that data. You've got to be able to know that it's being appropriately handled, and they want to see good data flow. If they don't see it, they'll just straight fail you. In fact, you won't even get out of phase one. They'll punch you right out and you won't get in there. So data flow is a huge deal. They want to see that the right people have access to it and that you've made logical choices about how you came to that conclusion.
Absolutely. So, okay, let's talk about security controls and assessment objectives. Now, I feel like this one gets the most amount of conversation, because it is very, very important since it is what, CMMC is like defined as. And so I want to talk about specifically how we break these down and what is too much and what is too little. I want to go ahead and state, let's not, who was it? Was it Mark, who is an assessor that was in this talk, in the back of the classroom, and he spoke up and he was like, don't just regurgitate what is said in the control or the assessment objective itself. So it's, if the control says, if the assessment objective says identify the user, do not just say we identify our users. You can't just stop it there. Yes, we do that, right? And so I liked how he said that, because it's so true. Sometimes some people are like, oh, how much detail do I really have to go into? And then they just kind of say that. Another thing that we stated too, right off the bat before going into the examples, is don't talk in future tense, right? Of we will be doing this. Our system will be identified in this way. Our users will do that. It's talking about the future, and it's like, okay, well, what are you doing now? Right? They're going to start asking that. I have had Tom Conkle say to us too, he gets frustrated if he sees people writing their customer responsibility matrices even in that way as well, with future tense rather than current. So those are two things right off the bat that I've noticed when talking with assessors about this stuff. Mention really quickly just a little bit about inheritance. If you want to hear more about our perspective on inheritance, we have a whole podcast episode. Inheritance is definitely a tricky subject because of how little of a definition they give in 32 CFR to it. But it's the the ability for an organization seeking assessment to inherit implementation and management of certain security controls or assessment objectives from an external service provider who has a CMMC level 2 certification.
Look at our faces on that.
We look so stressed, as we should while talking about this subject. I just want to say something really quick about this. If a MSP or somebody that is talking to you is saying, yeah, because we're CMMC level 2 certified, we don't have to be in your, in your assessment, and we don't have to be, a part of that. They need to read the CAP, okay, the CMMC assessment process that assessors should be following when assessing organizations, because that is not what it says there. So please just be very careful on what people are saying that you can inherit from them. And also just know that you're still responsible as the organization seeking assessment to still do all of this stuff. Like, you can't just sign the dotted line from an ESP, external service provider, that is CMMC level 2 certified. You just sign on the dotted line and they just take care of it for you. Like, it is your organization that is getting assessed that is going to be getting their CMMC level 2 certification or whatnot. Okay, so just be very, very careful what people are promising. Bobby, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, you said that so good. There's one thing I would add. So having, as an MSP, having your level 2 inheritance or your level 2 certification, think of it, here's the reason why that I would suggest you have it. It's like, imagine going into a finance deal and you have negative equity, right? So you have a debt, a lien on your house, and you're trying to sell it. As an MSP, if you don't have a level 2, that's sort of the way it goes. The auditor's now going to have to ask you a lot more questions to validate that you're back to zero. Then they can start asking the client. And what are those examples? They're going to want to know how you do your background checks for your team. They want to know that they have appropriate training. They want to know that the assets, how are you categorizing them as they go to come in, and have they been audited, and how are they audited? If they haven't been audited or assessed in any capacity, they're going to need to do that because nothing has been assessed on it. So you have this external connection or controls that they have to look at to try to understand how you're doing that. So you put more pressure on the auditor to start trying to just trust or believe me, bro, I'm doing this the right way. And so technically the way the audit's written, you can do that. It's just now you've blown up the assessment. I've heard C3POs say that they typically add a day, if not longer, for C3POs when they're assessing organizations that don't have their level 2 if they have an MSP involved. Some don't. I've heard others that say, oh, we just work it out and it works fine. It really just comes down to the C3PO. So you want to know how they're going to handle it if you're an MSP and you don't have your level 2. Not saying you can't do it. You definitely can. I've talked to and have heard people that have done it. It's just they're going to get up in your business because they want to know more. That doesn't mean if you have your level 2, they're not still going to do that. I've heard people that have had level 2 and they got raked across the coals regardless. It really comes a lot down to having pre-conversations with the C3PO that you're going to have your assessment with.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's talk about 2 more things. One is policies and procedures. So proof and the how-to for those controls, getting more in depth into describing your organization's way of doing things, how they access CUI, how they onboard somebody, the procedure that you committed to, from going all the way from you guys adding people into the system. Let's say you're hiring that person, going through an HR process. How do you background check them? Then how do you send them over to your, IT company or IT person to authorize them and add them into the system? There has to be procedures for those things. There has to be policies for each of those things.
So if you wrote a good SSP and you had a good policy and procedure, you could get a MET in theory before they talk to you in phase 2. What do I mean by that? That means in phase 1, you give the documentation. The auditors between phase 1 and phase 2 of your assessment will sit down and review and look at the documentation. They're supposed to assess at that point, as you're coming into your phase 2 and read the documentation, and it's great when you sit down with auditors that do this, because then they're not going to go, okay, 3-1 Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. They've already read the SSP and they already know which ones you've passed because they've read it and they know that you've already identified it in your policy. So in theory, you could, on day 1 of your of phase 2, you could have Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie done. Now what they want to do is say, okay, well, tell me how you limit it and show it to me. Open your intro. I just want to double check. So now you're getting right to the examine and test part. And they're not going to, they may even just skip those others because of your policies are so well written. They already looked at it. You're supposed to load it before your assessment and they've reviewed it and they look at it and they're like, this looks great. So that is between phase 1 and phase 2. So that's why having the policies and procedures well defined can save your audit time. And it makes your auditors feel much more comfortable. Okay. So you can get more into the technical piece, which who does that fall on? The MSP, right? So if the MSP has,
or your IT intern, if that's all that you have.
If you have your shiz together, technically it starts to go really fast because they're passing you on all the documentation requirements because you presented it to them correctly off the break. And so they're marking a lot of those met, and now they're just getting down to the business of like how you're specifically doing it. They're interviewing, asking some technical questions, and man, you're going to start flying through the audit when you have that.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so let's give an example of kind of what you were talking about with identifying a policy or procedure inside of your system security plan, kind of, Bobby, like how you were talking about with bolding it while talking about it. So here's an example of talking about a control implementation statement and what somebody did for PE 3.10.1, limiting physical access to organizational systems, equipment, and the respective operating environments to authorized individuals, right? So this is talking about what this organization does. And then they also, what they did is they bolded their policy for physical security and they put the section number that identifies as this. Bobby, what are your thoughts about this one?
This is great. This helps the auditor move very quickly. Remember, with your audit, it's a business. It's a business transaction between the OSC who's getting audited and the auditing company. So they want to be as efficient and quick as they can. So if you help them do that by having things like this set up for them, that makes the auditor's efficiency that much better when they're going through looking the audit. Now, it's a double-edged sword because if you decide to add some other sections and those section numbers change, you could get a not met because those numbers don't match. Now, traditionally, C3POs, and I'm going to say this in a very general term, most C3POs will give you grace here. If you get your numbers wrong, they'll give you a chance to fix it. They won't just straight fail you because that would be a total douche canoe move. But chances are they'll let you change it. Because, I mean, dang it, man, there's like, our SSPs over 200 pages, our administrative procedures 50. You know, so now you're at 300 pages, endless amounts of policy references, additional procedures that are going on. I mean, it's just that to get it all right perfectly, there's just no way. There's no way you're going to get it perfectly right. And if you did happen to get it right, that was nothing but your job for probably a straight year, you know? And then what do? You're like, you know, it's kind of like Indigo from, you know, Princess Bride, you know,
you always
now
call him Indigo.
Yeah,
it is Inigo.
And whatever. So I've heard it both ways. And you know, once you've completed, you know, once you've you know got your revenge, like what do you do after that, right? So you want to
Inigo Montoya.
Yeah, and so it's just it really comes down to making sure that you write your policies in such a way that it helps the auditors go through and find it. But understand you're going to get some grace there.
You can see how in-depth this can get and how tricky it can get with your document management when seeing something like this.
Well, that's where like the whiteboard, just like the folder structure of how you're going to keep all this.
Yeah, right.
Like you're going to have your SSP at a root, and then you might have your policies and procedures in another folder. You might have your document forms in another. You know, I mean, how are you going to put how are you going to organize all this? And then as you start to build it, it'll be shocking how many folders all of a sudden you'll end up with. And it's just crazy.
Yeah. So let's talk about the last thing, which is user roles and responsibilities. So this is a really interesting part where I feel like you could get too specific if you're not careful. You do not want to be vague about who is in your system and what access they have and what their responsibility is in your system. You do want to identify this stuff, but also I do feel like there is such thing as too much information about a person
100%.
in this situation. So here's an example one. This is awful. Like if you just have just a few, like IT department is responsible for security, like would you take it if it was just said IT department? Like, that doesn't really give any detail. Management, users, it's like very broad. It's very like group oriented of like, it's just talking about a group and what their one thing that they're responsible for is, right? Now, what about this? There is a system admin. They're responsible for this.
Mm-hmm.
There are end users that are responsible for this. Management responsible for this. There's a security officer that oversees these things.
Now you're talking.
Okay.
It's doing better.
Now there is this. So this talks about Chief Information Security Officer, so a CISO, and then it lists what the CISO does underneath. Then, and this isn't the only page, then it talks about the system administrator, and then underneath it says what they do, data custodian, all other users, management, and it does bullet points underneath. Is this a little too detailed here?
Okay, great point. This is something that we have a client that is like coming in for a landing for their audit, and the client has some internal training that they're super proud of. Like they cover a lot of other things, and they have a really nice, great onboarding procedure piece. And they were like, let's add all of that in the SSP to list it all out. And we were like, no. And they're like, what? Like, you don't want to put this all in here? I'm like, because if you put that in there, the auditor is going to be like, okay, now they could really want to hold you to every component. Show me the document that validates that this exact step has happened. And you're like, well, we don't have that. We just know that we're supposed to do that. And they're like, what? So you have this training that's critical that you require them to have, but you don't track it. And they're like, well, yeah. You're like, oh.
Yeah, so more of an opportunity for them to catch you, on something and hold you to something.
So it's the balance of what would be a great choice is hold that in reserve as if they go, well, is there additional auditing or training that you do that is enhanced? You may not have it in your SSP, but you might say, well, our HR person additionally does these types of activities with typically with these types of things. And in that situation, a lot of times the auditors aren't going to look at that and go, okay, well, because that wasn't specifically called out in policy procedure, but it makes me feel better that you're looking at the additional layers on top of it. They typically won't ask for the proof and the putting of all of those specifically, unless it's critical for the audit to be met. But it could help them mentally get over it to be okay with the control. So we call those kind of your ace in the sleeve things. So you want to have the bar that you want to hit, and then those additional things that you can kind of pull up.
Yes.
But if you just throw the whole kitchen sink at them, they're going to want to validate the whole kitchen sink.
Right.
So you want to hit this level of detail that you feel is needed to get it met, but you might have, in every control we have this additional evidence, and there might be some policies or procedures or other things that we might have that we can call out if we need to. And it's shocking. There's times where we've gone into an audit and we're like, man, we are ready for a war under this control. Auditor looks at it and goes, looks great. And they move on. And then they go to another one that you were like, and then they get into the weeds on it. And then you're like, oh my gosh, we're pulling up other things. They want to see this, and you're opening this and you're sharing that. And you're like, where did that come from? They're human.
It depends. I feel like we could get a 1-hour discussion for each of these slides too that we talked about. So trying to give you guys as much information as we can. Stay tuned next week what the best SSP template you've seen is too. Do you want to share that with anybody?
Yeah. We went with Curie Systems template is the one that we've used. I would say I haven't seen one that I felt really addresses MSPs well enough that I would be like, oh man, if you have that, you're golden.
Yeah.
Because MSPs tend to operate so differently. They have, I mean, I don't know if there ever could be one that could hit that sweet spot for an MSP because they approach things so differently. So having a template that is written in such a way that that has that. The reason why we liked Curie's templates is because it had a cyber maintenance checklist that has a very detailed breakdown of the processes that you would want to make sure get done for a client before they pick up the phone and call for help, right? So you're like, these are the types of activities. We took those and then we operationalized that in our ticketing system that create tickets that then made our team have to do those activities versus just an Excel spreadsheet. So we took that and consumed that into something, and then we moved it around using different tools and activities we had. But it was a great it was a great kind of backstop to make sure that we didn't have holes that that fall through the cracks, because it is so crazy easy to do.
It is, yeah.
Because when you're like, okay, we're getting to media protection, and that all of a sudden Azure Information Protection kicks in, and then you're like, okay, but then there's a procedure that says go sanitize the media, right? When you're done with it, or clean out and make sure that the physical devices are either cryptographically erased or erased at a certain capacity, and if they're trashed, that has to be, paper has to be shredded at certain things. There's these maintenance checklist activities that you want to make sure that you're doing that help you enforce to the auditor you have a very mature process. So a really good system has those backstops happening, whether someone puts in a ticket or requests a thing. Those things just happen automatically, or people are doing those types of activities. That's what deals with the human factor. It's gonna, that process is gonna fire off, and someone's gonna catch the activity of like, okay, Sentinel logs are being ingested. Yes, check. But are you checking to make sure that all the logs are being reported? What do you mean? You're like, well, like 4 of your machines are marked as stale. Like, are they still in your system? And they're like, well, yeah. And you're like, well, it hasn't reported to Sentinel in like 6 months. So that'd be a not met. So a CMC activity would be every 4 months or 3 months, once a quarter, you would go in and look to see, is all the Sentinel data being reported from all your connectors? And are you getting good data coming in? So you would look at it, make notes in your ticketing system, close the ticket out. You refer to that in your self-assessment. So when you go through your self-assessment each year, you have those activities that you have, and what you do is you build that system that is happening, that you're going through the cleaning process. The auditors love it because they're more apt to give you grace because they know you have a system that's going to catch the humanity in the process, right?
Yes,
they're going to catch
your humanity
that.
catches. Yes.
So it makes them feel really good, and that's the system that Curie had, that CMC checklist activities that really helped us narrow in, and then we were able to
human
take
factor.
on that human factor. What people typically say about their templates is they're very prescriptive, and so if you're looking for something more general that gives you a lot more leeway, you might not be very happy with that because it gets very specific about that. So you might have to change it and make it more high level. So it's just every template's different.
Yeah.
Every template's different.
Yeah. Well, guys, I hope, again, you enjoyed this one. And also, Malia put in the chat the next webinar that we're going to be having about CMMC readiness and what that looks like. This is going to talk about the system security plan a little bit, not as in-depth as this one does, but it goes into the other documents that you need to have ready, and that there's two types of readiness. There is the actual documentation and implementation of CMMC, and then there's the readiness for the assessment itself. So we're going to talk more about that side and the assessment side as well.
So we get to talk about the tango.
The tango, yes, the assessment tango.
That is so true, Kaylee. I love that because it gets so not many people talk about that. And that was one of the things that punched me in the face the biggest, was when we're like, man, our system's good. We're really good. And then I went to go through to do our self-assessment to kind of put my auditor hat on. And I'm like, okay, how am I going to prove or argue that we're met?
Yeah.
And I went to sit down. I'm like, oh, crap. This. And then you go to write it down, right? And you're like, okay, that. Yeah. And then, oh, what about this? And then you kind of add that on. And then you're like, yeah, that's how that's met. And you're like, yeah. Well, the auditor's sitting there going, okay, it's your turn. Tell me.
Yeah.
And they need you to tell them that.
Yeah. Is your script ready? Is your script ready to speak?
So, and that is its own thing.
Yeah. So make sure to check that out and register for that. But again, if you guys have any other questions, please let us know. Thank you again for listening, but we'll see you guys later. Bye, everybody. Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay up to date on the latest CMMC news. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and listen out for the next one. But until then, keep on climbing.